Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the life of someone I think you'll find pretty fascinating,
Oh, yeah?
Andrei Sakharov.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
You probably know him as, like, this big Soviet physicist.
Right. Huge in human rights, too, of course.
But what we're doing today is going beyond just the basic, facts and figures of his life. We're really going to try to get into the contradictions of his life.
That's what's so interesting about him, right? I mean,
Yeah.
How does someone go from building the most powerful weapon the world has ever seen to being this advocate for peace?
Yeah, exactly. And for human rights, on top of that, we'll be using excerpts from his biography, trying to figure out what we can learn from this guy's incredible life.
Sounds like a plan.
So, to really understand his transformation, I think we have to start with, well, Sakharov the scientist. I know you're probably already pretty familiar with all this, but it's important background for everyone.
Sure. Happy to break it down.
He was super involved in the Soviet atomic bomb project, right? Even helping to develop the hydrogen bomb.
It was the Cold War, right? I mean, you have to think about the context.
Right, yes, of course.
The Soviets and the Americans were basically in this race to build up their nuclear arsenal.
Intense rivalry, for sure.
Sakharov's third idea, the design he came up with for the hydrogen bomb, was absolutely groundbreaking. Do you know what's wild?
What's that?
It basically mirrors the Teller-Ulam design that the Americans were using. I mean, it's just incredible that they both independently arrived at such a similar design for something that complex.
Wow, that's a good point. It really shows you how much scientific brain power was focused on this stuff on both sides.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, there's the Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear device ever detonated.
You know, the crazy thing is, even Sakharov himself expressed concerns about its power before the test. It's a good reminder that, even those at the forefront of science sometimes grapple with the consequences of their work.
Yeah, for sure. Like, can you even fathom a 50 megaton explosion? It's hard to even wrap your head around.
The sheer scale of it is, well, it's terrifying, to be honest. But I think that reaction is kind of the point.
Yeah. Makes you think, right? About the responsibility that comes with such destructive force.
For sure. But to be fair to Sakharov, his work wasn't all about destruction. He also made significant contributions to controlled nuclear fusion research.
Oh, right. Didn't he work on the tokamak concept?
Yep, that was him. Still relevant today, too.
So, I mean, it sounds like he wasn't just obsessed with, like, the destructive side of physics, but also saw the potential for good.
I think that's fair to say. He was definitely driven by a deep curiosity and desire to push the boundaries of scientific knowledge.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, I gotta ask about his work on explosively pumped flux compression generators. These things sound straight out of science fiction. What drove him to experiment with creating such intensely powerful magnetic fields?
Oh, those are fascinating. He called them MK generators.
Hmm.
Imagine creating magnetic fields with millions of amperes.
Whoa, that's nuts.
It really shows his, his ingenuity, always pushing the limits.
Right. But I guess at some point, the implications of all this, particularly in the context of nuclear proliferation, must started to weigh on him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, Sakharov wasn't someone who could just shut off the ethical side of his brain. He felt this deep sense of responsibility for the potential consequences of his work.
So when did this shift start? Like, was there a specific event that triggered it?
Well, in 1963, he became a vocal advocate for the Partial Test Ban Treaty, trying to stop those atmospheric nuclear tests.
Pretty bold move, especially during the Cold War.
Oh, absolutely. He was putting himself out there. It wasn't just about immediate danger either. I think he saw where things were headed.
Oh, what do you mean?
He foresaw a future where widespread nuclear weapons could really devastate the planet.
That's some serious foresight. I mean, he was thinking way ahead of his time.
And he didn't stop there. He was also really concerned about the anti-ballistic missile defense system, even tried to warn the Soviet leadership about how it could, make the arms race even worse.
So he wasn't just fixated on one issue. He was looking at the whole interconnected system.
Exactly, seeing how all these things were tied together. And it wasn't just talking either. He actively tried to change things.
Yeah, not just empty words. He was putting his ideas into action. And it wasn't just limited to his scientific work, right? This sense of responsibility.
Right. It really started to spill over into the realm of, human rights within the Soviet Union itself.
So that's where we really see the transition to Sakharov the activist. This is where things get really interesting. I'm really curious to hear about how he navigated that whole situation, especially in a system that wasn't exactly known for tolerating dissent.
Yeah, That's where we pick up next time. So we left off talking about how Sakharov was starting to, speak out against things within the Soviet system itself.
Yeah. What exactly pushed him to action? Like, was there one defining moment, or was it more of a gradual thing?
I think for Sakharov, it was really about truth. He had this unwavering commitment to intellectual freedom.
Uh-huh.
And one example that really stands out is his opposition to Lysenkoism.
Lysenkoism, that rings a bell, but remind me.
So basically, it was this whole ideology that rejected basic genetics, like the idea that acquired traits could be inherited.
Wait, seriously, that sounds like, I don't know, some kind of dystopian science fiction thing. What was he thinking?
It was a big deal politically at the time.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The Soviet state really embraced it. So Sakharov speaking out against it, well, that was a direct challenge to the powers that be.
So why was he so against it? I mean, apart from it being scientifically shaky, to say the least.
Well, he saw how it was being used to persecute real scientists. And honestly, it was having some pretty disastrous effects on Soviet agriculture, too.
Right, yeah. When ideology gets in the way of actual science, things tend to go south pretty quickly.
Exactly. For Sakharov, it was all about defending good science.
Standing up for the truth, even when it's dangerous.
Right. And that takes us to his essay, Reflections on Progress, Peaceful Coexistence, and Intellectual Freedom. Have you read it?
I have, yeah. Powerful stuff. A real critique of the Soviet system. I can't imagine circulating something like that in samizdat, knowing the risks.
Yeah, pretty brave. He was calling for things like freedom of expression and democratic reforms, things we take for granted today.
Definitely not things you could just talk about openly back then.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact did the essay have?
Well, it definitely got people talking. It made waves. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it definitely helped to raise awareness, I'd say.
And it wasn't just words on paper, He took action, too. Helped found the Committee on Human Rights in the USSR.
Right. Another direct challenge to the regime. I mean, what were they thinking? The Soviet authorities couldn't have been too happy about all this, right?
Oh, they definitely noticed.
So what did they do?
Smear campaigns in the media calling him a traitor. The usual playbook. Plus, he was under constant surveillance by the KGB. The pressure on him and his family was intense.
It's amazing he didn't back down. Most people would just, I don't know, kept their heads down and tried to stay out of trouble.
He was incredibly stubborn when it came to his principles. I mean, this wasn't just abstract talk about human rights.
Oh, right. He actually got involved in specific cases.
Absolutely. He was a huge supporter of Soviet Jews who were trying to emigrate. Even went so far as to appeal to the U.S. Congress about the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. That was a big deal.
Wow. So he was really putting himself out there for others. His commitment was incredible. And of course, all of this led to him being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975.
Yeah, they called him a spokesman for the conscience of mankind.
And, I mean, it's true. He really became this global symbol for human rights.
It's tragic that he wasn't allowed to travel to receive the prize. I mean, imagine that. You win the Nobel Prize, but you can't even go to the ceremony. His wife, Yelena Bonner, had to read his speech in Oslo. She was a prominent activist in her own right, too,
Yeah, I know. That must have been so frustrating for him. So what did his Nobel lecture focus on?
Well, he definitely didn't shy away from criticizing the Soviet system, that's for sure. He spoke about the need for disarmament, about environmental protection, international cooperation, and, of course, human rights.
So basically everything he'd been fighting for. Did he ever soften his stance?
Nope. He even read out a whole list of political prisoners in his speech. Imagine the guts that took.
It's clear his activism was not going unnoticed. So how did the Soviets respond after that?
Well, in 1980, they took things to a whole new level.
Oh, what happened?
They exiled him to Gorky. Internal exile. Imagine being cut off from your work, your friends, everyone you know. That's what they did to Sakharov.
Wow, that's harsh, just for speaking his mind. What was life like for him in exile? Did he give up?
He was under constant surveillance. His apartment was searched. I mean, they even staged fake burglaries to try and intimidate him.
Geez, that's awful. How did he handle it all?
Sakharov was resilient, though. He kept writing, kept speaking out. His wife was a huge support, of course. But, I mean, it was a dark time.
And they targeted her too, right?
Oh, yeah. At one point, Sakharov even went on a hunger strike to try and get her permission to travel abroad for medical treatment.
Wow, he was really willing to put everything on the line for her. For his principles. What a story.
Talk about commitment, right? But even in that darkness, there was this, glimmer of hope.
Oh, what was that?
In 1985, the European Parliament established the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. in his honor.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Recognition from outside the Soviet Union? What a powerful statement.
It was. And then in 1986, things began to change in the Soviet Union itself. Gorbachev came to power, with his perestroika and glasnost.
Right. A whole new era. So did that affect Sakharov?
Absolutely. Gorbachev personally called Sakharov and Gorky to tell him he could come home. After 7 years, can you
So
imagine?
it's like something out of a movie. The exiled hero returns.
And that was just the beginning of a whole new chapter in his life. I mean, he came back to Moscow and immediately jumped back into the political scene. He was elected to the Congress of People's Deputies in 1989, led a democratic opposition group, even went on a fact-finding mission to Armenia and Azerbaijan during the Karabakh conflict.
He just couldn't stay quiet, could he? Even after everything he'd been through.
He was relentless. Sadly, though, he died suddenly in 1989. Still some mystery around how it all happened.
What a life. From top secret physicist to human rights icon, what a legacy.
And it's a legacy that continues to this day. The Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, awarded by the European Parliament. Still going strong. Plus, the American Physical Society has an Andrei Sakharov Prize. There are prizes for writers and journalists named after him, too.
Wow, that's incredible. He truly inspired people all over the world. His story is proof that, well, even one person can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I mean, his life raises some big questions. What can we learn from him? How can his example inspire us today? That's something I think we all need to think about.
So we've spent a lot of time on this deep dive, really going deep into Sakharov's life, from those early days as this brilliant scientist to his transformation into this fearless human rights activist.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. But now I think it's time to sort of bring it all back around. What does his story mean for us today? Like, what can we learn from this guy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Sakharov's life wasn't just some historical event. It's full of these lessons that are still relevant, especially for anyone, who's dealing with those tough ethical choices or trying to speak truth to power.
Definitely. What about you listening right now? What part of Sakharov's story really stuck with you? Was it that scientific genius of his? Or maybe the courage he showed, even when things got really tough? Or how about his dedication to human rights, no matter what?
For me, it's how his thinking evolved. He was never afraid to question himself, like his own role in the system, the ethics of his work, all of it. And ultimately, he chose to fight for a better world. Pretty inspiring, right?
Totally. It makes you think, right? Like, are we just going along with things, maybe ignoring injustice?
Yeah.
Are we speaking up when we see things that are wrong?
Sakharov's story is like this big wake-up call. It's saying, hey, silence is basically the same as being complicit. We have this responsibility to speak up, stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard.
It's not always easy, that's for sure. But even small acts of courage, they can make a difference. Like ripples in a pond. They can inspire other people to take action too. It's about creating a movement.
Right. And I know it's easy to get overwhelmed by, well, everything that's going on in the world. Climate change, all the political fighting, social injustice. It's a lot.
Yeah, I can feel pretty hopeless sometimes.
But Sakharov shows us that, well, that things can change. Individuals really can make a difference, even when the problems seem huge.
I mean, think about what he was up against. Living under a totalitarian regime, constantly being watched, harassed. But he never gave up. He just kept writing, speaking out, organizing, fighting. If he could do that, well, we can definitely do something too.
Yeah, we don't have to be Nobel Prize winners or anything. It starts with those smaller things. Speaking up in our communities, supporting organizations we believe in, even just talking to friends and family about tough issues.
Those little steps add up, they build momentum. Sakharov's life proves that.
Yeah.
He didn't start out trying to be some global icon. He just followed his conscience, and look at the impact he had.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Sakharov's life and legacy, I have a little challenge for everyone listening. What's one small thing you can do today, inspired by Sakharov, to make the world just a little bit better? Write to your representative, volunteer somewhere, donate to a good cause. Have that tough conversation you've been putting off. Whatever it is, take that step. Let Sakharov's legacy be a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time.